Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chair Yellen, thank you for appearing before us this afternoon. Last time that you were here, I talked to you a little bit about our district. I represent Virginia's 5th District, a very rural district. Agriculture is the primary part of our economy, which helps make up the primary part of the Virginia economy, which is ag and forestry together. At that time, I asked you about my concerns relating to the community banks and what's being done specifically to help them. You said when we talked last that, quote, we want to listen to their concerns and understand them, and we are doing our very best to listen and try to tailor an appropriate set of capital requirements and other regulations. You went on to say that we want to do our very best to make sure that community banks aren't burdened with all that regulation. And I'm sure you're familiar with the recent Harvard study that came out, Harvard study that tells us now what those of us back in the 5th District already knew, and that is the community banks are hurting. For the last 20 years, we've seen their share of lending drop from 41% to 22%. I think since Dodd-Frank was enacted, we've seen their share drop 12% alone. I guess what I'd like to hear from you today, because you didn't get into the specifics at our last meeting, specifically what are we doing to stop this, and what are we doing to reverse this trend so that we can have capital access for working families in places in districts like mine, capital access for small businesses and for our farmers.
So I completely agree about the importance of community banks and the critical role that they play in providing credit to businesses and households in their communities. And of course, they do suffer from significant regulatory burdens. In the Agrippa reviews that we're doing, we are looking at the set of regulations that we have in place. We will be taking public comment and trying to identify ways in which we can reduce burden on those and other depository institutions.
Can you talk specifically about proposals that you think that will help stop this trend and, in fact, reverse it?
Well, we've just begun that process, and we are having public meetings, and we'll be taking comments, and we'll look to identify such initiatives. In terms of things we can do on our own, we're trying to improve the efficiency of our exams. We're conducting much more work off-site so that examinations are less burdensome to firms. We're simplifying and trying to tailor our pre-exam requests for documentation from these institutions. We're trying to help community bankers figure out what regulations they do have to pay attention to because they apply to community banks, and which regulations just have nothing to do with them and they can ignore them. We have formed several years ago a group called CDAC, which is representatives of community banks from around the country, from each of the 12 reserve districts.
Has that been useful?
It has been useful.
Has it resulted in any concrete proposals?
We have very detailed discussions to try to understand what their concerns are, and we have followed up on them when issues have arisen about the way in which our examiners conduct exams or practices that they may have that they see as impeding lending. We try to follow up both internally and also with other banking agencies to make sure that we're not imposing undue burden and are addressing the specific questions they have. At the board, we have formed a new committee that focuses explicitly and exclusively on supervision of community banks to try to look for ways to speed up application processes and to reduce burden. So I know many of these banks are suffering with low interest rates. They also have compressed net interest margins, and that's hurt their profitability. That's a part of the environment.
My time's about to expire, but I would ask that you do everything that you can to continue to make this a front burner issue because it is deeply affecting working families, small businesses, and family farmers all across my district.
I hear you, and I promise to do so.
Time of the gentleman is